So what I'd like to do right now is discuss this relationship between a story idea and the story details. Now, typically what will happen is if you're probably watching this video, it's because you are a writer, an aspiring writer, you want to write novels or screenplays, and you have some kind of idea, and ideas always start somewhere. Maybe you've got a character in your mind, a scene in your mind, a plot in your mind. You've got some, idea that just kind of floats around. The amazing thing about ideas is they are big and they're unbridled and they're limitless in their scope. And the challenge, of course, is we've got to express them. We've got to use our keyboards and our imagination to bring this idea, this big idea, down to something tangible, down to something that can be read and grasped and envisioned, and in the case of a screenplay, made into a movie and acted out and filmed. So again, the challenge is take the big idea, the story idea, and then bring out the story details. This is the real challenge for a writer. And when we start with our idea, we're kind of like stuck in this mode. We don't have much. We just got an idea. And like I said, the idea could be a myriad of different starting points. And what we have to do is get down to story details. And what we do in Your Storytelling Potential is we really lay out in the comprehensive details that are required. Not the simple, flat, two-dimensional line that kind of goes up, Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, with an inciting incident and a couple plot points and a midpoint. We really think much more dynamically, richly, deeply, and more robustly about our stories and how we're going to express those ideas, that story idea, and bring it down to details. And this is a creative, repetitive process of discovery. You start with this idea and you feed it through the machine of thinking and creating and developing all the story details. And what we want to do is come up with something that looks like this, because this is an accurate, let me zoom in, I think the next slide, there we go. So this is an accurate way to think about your stories. And you'll notice right away, we don't think about stories with some kind of thin timeline of just a sequence of events. There's no sequence of events when we start thinking about our ideas. We don't want to get stuck thinking about the sequence of events, because the sequence of events, which are implied here, there's a sequence of events that would take place here. And what you're looking at here is this is what feeds into the now of your story. So here's the beginning of your story, here's the end of your story that we call the now. This is what you're telling. If you're writing a novel, if you're writing a screenplay, if you want to tell some kind of specific story, whatever it is, the beginning of that's what you write. I want to be clear here. The beginning of what you write starts here and ends here. But that's not where the story begins, because there's a reality, two realities in fact, flowing from before your story starts to the beginning of what you're writing. And there's first of all, there's what we call the A story, which is what creates the definable, meaningful plot. And then there's what we call the B story. That's the main character's own personal reality that flows into the now. And what happens in a story is those converge. That's what we have here going on here. Let's see, hold on. That's what we have going on here. So I'm zooming in on this area here. What we have here is this is the personal storyline of your main character flowing through the now, flowing through the story you're telling. This is what we call the A story, or the plot. And those events are usually not related. Sometimes they're not related at all. They have nothing to do with each other. But they converge and collide to create what we call the character wave. In fact, this is called the complete character wave. And this is how real incredible structure is created. But the better way to think about your stories is not to think about the timeline. So what we do in my system is we take you out of we'll use this image. We take you out of the mode of thinking about the timeline and the when things need to happen. Well, there's an inciting incident. What happens at the inciting incident, which is just a point on the timeline. And then there's a plot point, and then a midpoint and a plot point. Well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen at those moments? Rather than approaching our storytelling and our creative process that way, what we do is we use what's called the core elements. And in fact, these core elements allow us to create what's called the uniquely extraordinary main character loop, because that's so essential. First of all, you need to have a main character who's related to what is going on in that A story. It can't just be arbitrary. It can't just be an arbitrary person that this story is happening to. But what these core elements is focused on, just the core elements. These core elements allow you to think about what is happening. What are the main components of what we call the A story? What are the main components of what we call the B story? What are the main components of the character? What is the thematic layer? that deeply rooted thematic layer, which is what glues the whole thing, the whole story together. It's the reason, the thematic layer, by the way, is the reason this story, this plot is happening to this main character. And that's why we call this the uniquely extraordinary main character loop, because the characterization of your main character feeds into what they're going to do, called the logical solution. That's what they try to do to resolve whatever's happening in the primary situation. That leads to, ultimately, that doesn't work. It fails. At the midpoint, it's always a failure, and I've discussed this in other videos. Then you get to what's called the discovery, a revelation. This is where new information is provided that gives them the clarity, and that clarity allows them to resolve what's going on. And it resolves what's going on both in their B story and the A story that's flowing through the now. And what links all this together is that personal goal, that deeply rooted why of your main character that flows out to what was called the theme and the opposing idea and circles back around, creating this character loop. But what this allows you to do is think about what is happening. Not when these things happen. What are all the things that are happening in your story? And then what we do is we apply the what's into, let me go to this image. We take all those what is happening and they all fit into here. They're not listed on this graph. In the book, you get full detail and everything is fully explained, this in complete detail. But what happens is each one of those what's fits into here. And that's the whens. And that's what allows you to have meaningful structure. And then we see, the image I'm looking for is this one. And what we explain more clearly is that we've got these, what are called B stories, or the main B story flows into the now, intercepts a plot, the A story, and the main character, and this theme and opposing idea leads to what's called the reveal potential. And this is what links your main character to your plot. And that is so essential because the difference between the good screenplays and the really very good ones and great ones, and the ones that get considered and actually potentially made into movies, is the linking of the A and the B stories together with what's called the deeply rooted why. And this is the better way to think about your story ideas, to take that story idea, that big idea you have, that big light bulb moment, and to pull it not into a timeline, but to pull it into the core elements. And the core elements will let you see clearly all the what's of your story. And then from there, you can then build out the whens.